Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. I'm joined today on the podcast by Elisabeth Stamper, who is the CEO of Medichem and Vice President of Medicines for Europe. Elisabeth, welcome back to the podcast and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me and thank you for having Medicines for Europe at your podcast again.
Of course. Elisabeth, you've been one of the more vocal advocates for Critical Medicines Act. And given where we are in 2026, I think it feels like a really good time to hear your perspective on the Critical Medicines Act, CMA, and what it all means. So maybe as a starting point, the CMA didn't emerge from nowhere. Perhaps you could take us back to the moment that the industry realized Europe had a genuine problem on its hands. And what was the wake-up call?
I think everyone recalls that the wake-up call happened during COVID, during those lockdown months where everyone realized that we were very much dependent on basic medicines, old molecules basically, which in most of the cases used in the emergency rooms, which in most of the cases were coming from outside Europe. And because some geographies closed their borders, we realized that our dependency on those sort of basic medicines was high. Immediately after, if you recall, in the sequence of what happened, immediately after COVID, when we started more or less to go back to our normal lives, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia started. Which got lots of attention, obviously, from the European authorities. And then it was during the presidency of Belgium of the European Council, where they proposed to start this Critical Medicines Alliance, actually, to push for a Critical Medicines Act, which should somehow strengthen the position of Europe and reduce the dependency from other geographies, especially in what we call critical medicines. Those critical medicines are in a list which is updated on a yearly basis. So it was first issued. So the first global European list was issued in December 23, dated in the end of 24, and it was updated again last year by December. And it contains, it's about roughly 300 molecules, different molecules.
Okay.
And according to IQVIA, a bit over 90% of those 300 molecules are generics, so older molecules. And a significant part thereof are no longer produced in Europe. So that was basically the beginning of the Critical Medicines Alliance. It was the first initiative where you had in the same meeting room different stakeholders from patient associations, hospital associations, pharmacists, the European authorities, the different commissioners were represented, but also the industry, all sorts of industry related, innovative, but also the generic and biosimilar sector. And there were different workshops. It was quite intense. It was driven by HERA, by this new entity which was created by the European Commission after COVID, called it's the emergency side of the Commission. So it's emergency and readiness, basically, of Europe to respond to situations like COVID, or I don't know if we had Ebola or this sort of things.
Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority, he says, Googling it quickly.
Yeah. So, and it was basically driven by the team there. With different rapporteurs, and it ended up in a proposal with different studies done by different entities, and it ended up in a proposal. As you know, in Brussels, this is driven by the European Commission in a text which was published, And then the latest on this document, which is now a proposal of the Critical Medicines Act, was that I think about a month ago, the Parliament sort of published, well, sort of, no, they published their version, their improved version of the original document published or issued
Okay.
by the Commission. And that's the progress. So after the publication by the Parliament, it goes to the trialogues between the Council, the Commission, and the Parliament, and then it needs to be ratified somehow by the different health ministries of the 27 member states.
Yep.
And that's basically the process, and that's where we are. So the latest has been this publication by the European Parliament.
And it needs to be, as you say, ratified by the 27 member states. Assuming that all goes according to plan, is there an expected implementation date? I think I've seen 2028. Is that still the case?
Yeah, that's still the case because the trialogues will still take, I think, most of this year. So if it's eventually published still in 2026, then the countries have usually a couple of years to implement.
Would it be possible to break down the overall stated goals of the Act, please? What's it trying to achieve?
It's trying to achieve reduced dependency on a certain group of medicines, which are defined as critical medicines.
Foreign manufacturing outside of Europe.
Yeah, it's aiming to strengthen the industry in Europe and also regulate some of the root cases for the shortages that still continue to happen in Europe. And there you have different root causes like, well, basically it's driven by very low prices and the downward price pressure, and tenders based basically only on price and nothing else. And also the current version of the Parliament is trying to regulate also on stockpiling, because some countries have stockpiling rules, which due to the size of the country would mean that other countries around them would not have enough supply of those medicines.
It sounds as though the procurement side, the collaborative procurement side, is one of the more complex elements of this. Is it possible to explain how that's supposed to work in practice, and what are some of the difficulties around that?
Well, on collaborative procurement, the position from the Parliament is it should be on rare and orphan drugs, especially because those are usually small volumes, because you have not so many patients. And it also is usually a challenge for the smaller member states. So that's the position on the Parliament. For larger volumes products, if you wish, it's collaborative procurement is a bit more complicated because, as you know, each country has its own packaging and licensing rules, which are not harmonized. So that would be a challenge. I don't know exactly, but if we have 27 members, we have probably, I don't know, at least 15 different languages. So that would be one of the main issues. And this is basically where we stand with the collaborative procurement.
Thank you. I was speaking to the API Innovation Center, APIC, in the US, who are trying to achieve a similar sort of thing. It's around, reshoring of critical medicines around the US and making sure that they are producing those small molecules internally. One of the interesting areas they're focusing on is around advanced manufacturing and using federal funding to invest in facilities with continuous flow technologies, looking at better use of digital twins and other ways to get more output from the facilities. That's one of the ways that they're looking to combat this pricing pressure by modernizing facilities. Is anything like that in scope around critical medicines?
No. What is in scope? Because there is nothing only focused on APIs.
Hmm.
So the Critical Medicines Act is trying to, the Parliament version is trying to somehow regulate how the tenders work and ask the member states to source from products um, which are manufactured totally or partially in the EU. But there is nothing specific about the APIs. The API will be the main component, but still, it's only a component. On those US initiatives, it's difficult to say. First of all, because even if it's cheaper to produce, labor costs in the US are much higher than
Hmm.
anywhere in the world. So it's not that easy. And continuous flow is only applicable to certain medicines, so to certain molecules. So it's not one solution works for all molecules. That would
Hmm.
be very easy. That's one thing. And then the other, which is a bit contradictory if you wish, and I would say the same happens in Europe. If you have a tablet approved, a product approved in the US, and you have two API suppliers, one is Chinese, the other is whatever, manufactured in the US or in Europe, the authorities don't know. They would have to test batch by batch or request a certificate batch by batch of the product to know if the API is manufactured outside of the US
Okay.
and the origin of the API. And this also
Mm.
happens in Europe because you submit a file and you may have five API suppliers located in five different territories. And unless you have whatever an audit from the authorities who obviously do track and trace the product backwards, and you have, as a company, you always have those records. But what I mean is the authorities do not have the complete information on the source of where the API has been, of
Mhm.
what the source is of the API, which is currently consumed neither in the US nor in Europe.
Yep. Yep.
That would require a really sophisticated system.
Thinking about the US, how was this working alongside what's happening in the United States around, for example, the most favored nation price pressure that that's putting on, and also, this associated trade tariffs and other measures which are happening. How's that impacting European pricing, supply dynamics? I guess in general, maybe in the generics market, but also with regards to Critical Medicines Act, does it have an impact?
It does not have an impact as of today because generics are exempted from tariffs.
Mhm. Yep.
But the landscape is like ever changing, especially for the past for the past 14 months with regard to the UK to the US. So it's really difficult to assess.
Yep.
We consider, and that's one of the things the association is pushing for, to have the Commission convincing the US side that Europe should be considered as an ally, and that somehow relying on Europe would make their dependency from other territories easier. The same
Hmm.
way that for Europe it would be also interesting to have the US manufactured product as allied products, right?
Well, I mean, yes, I mean that does sound logical. Yes.
Because what is never going to happen is to have neither Europe nor the US manufacturing 100% of the products.
Hmm.
It doesn't make any sense.
Considering how much of it's been offshored for decades now.
Exactly. If you look at product and at, I think honestly, I think I don't know for sure. I think it's like one of the most used products in the world, which is atorvastatin, is not produced in Europe.
Hmm.
So you depend on whatever you do, it's produced outside Europe.
Yep.
So and it's a widely used molecule for cholesterol.
Hmm. Mm.
So it's difficult, I think, to bring back all the essential medicines. Well, if you look at the critical medicines, first of all, some of them are produced in very small volumes. So would it make sense to establish the whole supply chain only for very small or products which are, thanks God, only used occasionally?
Hmm.
And then I think we should have a broader view because there are products which are maybe are not considered critical medicines, but widely used, still widely used.
Mm. Mm.
So how do you establish for the US or for Europe which products we should produced within the territory? I think that would be a very difficult decision and to bring back all those supply chains. And one of the main issues there also is that for some of the key starting materials of the API, I think we discussed this in the past.
Mm.
Some of the key starting materials for some of the APIs, we are 100% reliant on Southeast Asia. They are not produced in Europe nor in the US.
Yep.
And in Europe, you would not be able to produce them due to environmental reasons.
And there'd be no plans to change that at all, certainly from a
Us, no,
legislative point
no,
of view.
no, no. At least I'm not aware
Mm.
of that.
What do you think this is likely to mean for different parts of the ecosystem? I mean, so take the example of a space that you're very familiar with. As a generics manufacturer in Europe, does this create opportunities? Does it create challenges? What's the likely business impact going to be?
The Critical Medicines Act,
Yeah,
if it's implemented,
exactly.
I think it would make the European industry more attractive.
Hmm.
It would, because there are some incentives included in the plan. It would also make the tender system or the public procurement, if you wish to use better words, to be not only based on price, but also on
Hmm.
other criteria. And one of the things we are advocating for is to use the most economically advantaged tender system, which is the meet criteria, which means you should take into account also the capacity. If you could have more than one company awarded, so that you do not only rely on one winner, and this also creates double sourcing
Hmm.
for the countries. Um, the main problem is if the 27 members do not agree to pay a higher price for the product manufactured in Europe,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's going to be difficult to implement. And at the end of the day, each individual member state has its own health budget, and they don't want to be told by Brussels how to spend that.
Would that potentially be a blocker to the ratification process? They'd all be signing up to the same terms.
I guess it could be a blocker. I think for the industry, it would be very positive because it would somehow, it would be good for the industry on the incentive side, on the tender side, um, and also on the stockpiling, which is now creating a huge problem with some countries where it's a place like France and Germany. I think for the patients, it would ensure that those 300 molecules somehow have stronger and more resilient supply chains.
Hmm.
So for the patients, it would definitely be better.
Assuming that everything goes according to plan, this comes into law in 2028, how would we be able to tell by, let's say, by 2030, if CMA actually achieves its objectives and work? What would good look like after it's been in place for a couple of years?
I guess taking some example, some molecules and check if they have been effectively reshored.
Hmm.
I guess that would be one measure. Another could be to evaluate if the price of the molecules of the generic products continue to go only down or if they stabilize,
Yep.
generally speaking. If there are some changes in the public procurement systems, um, and at the end of the day, if the number of shortages has been reduced,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is the main risk at the end of the day.
absolutely. As you say, stabilization of generics pricing would be very positive for the
Yes.
industry.
Yes, there are studies which show that, I don't know, in the past 5 years, the price of bread has gone up like 48%, and the price of generics has gone down by
Oh,
8%.
wow. Yeah, yeah.
So,
At the same time, with more expectations when it comes to sustainability and everything else.
exactly.
Yeah,
And I mean, the workforce likes to have annual salary increases aligned with
yeah,
inflation, right?
yeah, yeah, of course.
So,
Yeah,
and energy also goes up with inflation and cost of everything. So pricing should at least be indexed to inflation,
yes.
and it's
Yeah.
not.
Elizabeth, thank you for explaining all of that so clearly. Any final thoughts?
I think the critical medicines continues to be a big opportunity for Europe. Um, I feel a bit sad when I hear how much the other territories, and you name it, it's India, China, or the US, are advancing in whatever, creating more energy creation, or being more advanced in AI, or
Mm,
and I somehow think that we are missing our opportunity also as Europeans to do something unique, and to establish the Critical Medicines Alliance would be extremely good for the European patients and also for the European industry. So
yeah, yeah, completely agreed. I guess one of the downsides of having so many member states and
yeah.
reaching agreements across much easier if you don't have a democracy, isn't it?
I'm not gonna agree on that. That would be a risk.
A nice way to end the interview. Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time today. Always a
Thank
pleasure
you.
speaking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.